Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Hope you all are well. Hope you all can hear me. Y'all got me? Let's see. Bum, bum, ba-dum.
Oh, you're talking about the part with me in Florida and the Skittles in my foreskin. Yeah, okay, no, that was like a wordsmith there.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. You dang straight. GS. That's the real you. I'm not looking to see. I don't care. Okay, let's get started. What's up, Freddy? Nomad, Glock, Double M's. I saw Hefe was first. He's my Kimmy today. All right. I think this may be the. No, it's not. All right. Kiddo. You're sexy soulmate. Hey, Misty and Toker. All right, let's get started. Home. And who is this new me? Wait a minute. Where'd that go? Why aren't we showing? Oh, that is the whole of the sentence. And who is this new me? Lieutenant Colonel Bill Russell Edmonds, U.S. Special Forces, following 12 months in Iraq, 2005. As they were shaking a year's worth of Iraqi dust out of their gear and crating it all up to ship home, the soldiers of Task Force Panther each got an unusual letter from the senior enlisted leader. That was Command Sergeant Major Paul Walker, a short, well-muscled man responsible for looking after the battalion's enlisted soldiers. In private life, he is a foreman in the coal mines of southwest Pennsylvania. But in Iraq, Paul Walker was foremost a soldier, the kind of guy who is a stickler for discipline and standards of conduct, who is passionate about protecting his soldiers, and who would push them forward in combat. He would win the coveted Bronze Star Medal for his performance in Iraq. His soldiers were exhausted but vibrating with giddy jitters about their imminent flight home. The decibel level of gravasse around Camp Habanea had risen noticeably. Soldiers going outside the wire were taking extra precautions against snipers and IEDs, reluctant to assume any unnecessary risk on their last missions. In a few hours, many of them would gather at the chapel where Chaplain Eder would pass out the index cards and stubby pencils. Now, though they sat and read Walker's letter, the life we left 18 months ago is the life most are hoping to return to, he wrote. But he warned each soldier has been forever changed by the war. The person who now returns is not the same one who left. And all you about to be veterans will have to absorb the good and bad of your war experiences, figure out who you are now and who your new selves fit into civilian life. All that, the Sergeant Major wrote, It's something we will have to take day by day. Sweet Melissa. They were about to discover, as many said later, that as they arrived home, they would be as vulnerable to sorrow, regret, guilt, grief, and loss as they were in combat. Moral injury often endures long after the welcome home banners are faded and torn. More than that, returning troops often suffer additional moral injuries in the bumpy transition back to the civilian world. No other event in the lives of men and women at war seems to reach a climax as powerful as going home. So hotly anticipated, so quickly accomplished, so unexpectedly difficult. For months, it's all you can dream about. Spending hours constructing elaborate plans to indulge in every delicious fantasy denied in a war zone. Sleep. Oops, sorry. Lost where I was. Good food. Dreamed of food a lot. Sex. Finally, it's time. And there's the dizzying 1 day flight home. Kids and wives and mothers in their holiday finery, many clutching newborns, throng air bases and parking lots to receive the returning troops. And as they arrive, emotions just explode. The first hugs are delicious, the first beers and steaks, the awkward attempts at intimacy, the newness of it all that goes by in a flash. Then comes what can be a crushing sense of loss. First, you notice the slowness of home, its flatness, nothing to jolt the adrenaline. Life seems to have faded from sharp color to fuzzy gray. So different from war, where life marches to an insistent, purposeful drumbeat, where decisions often hold life or death consequences. Step here and your legs are blown off. Step there and you're safe for another minute. At home, Fruit Loops or Cheerios. And it's too quiet here. Gone is the background rumble of generators, the familiar bellowing of sergeants, the whine and growl of truck engines, rattling gunfire, thudding helicopters. Instead, an empty apartment or a house whose occupants have left for work or school. Also gone, your stature as a successful warrior. An army sergeant who's taken his squad to war and brought his soldiers back safe. No civilian can understand the field of wisdom, the tactical cunning, the accomplishment demanded, the patience required, the hours waiting, sleepless and rigid with worry as a team is late returning from night patrol. What's up, Chris? The pressure tested leadership it all took. For some, leadership in wartime, responsibility for a few hundred soldiers or hundreds is the high point of a lifetime. Yet, that skill and the authority it confirmed seemed to belong back there in the war. Here at home, the sergeant is just another guy nursing a late night beer, or he's the unemployed new father trying to juggle rent and car payments, the electric bill, and the wife who's used to operating on her own. All this can add new bruises to your sense of right and wrong, your image of yourself as a good and deserving person. Being home may reawaken feelings of regret or guilt for having left the family for adventure of war, grief for lost friends. Deferred while you're at war can come flooding back, and being suddenly immersed in a society that's either given up on the war or is ignoring it Sorry, fire trucks. And being suddenly immersed in a society that's either given up on the war or is ignoring it can spark feelings of anger and betrayal. The jagged emotional transition from war to home is often accompanied by the dull ache of sorrow. At war, you rely on intimate companions for guidance, support, understanding, comic relief, and literally your life. And you give it back. Merry Christmas, Doss. That's suddenly gone. A loss especially painful for those like Darren Doss who leave military service behind, and for the National Guard and Reserve troops like Jake Sexton who scatter individually to their small towns and urban neighborhoods rather than returning home together to Fort Bragg or Camp Lejeune. The abrupt disappearance of beloved comrades can cause lasting grief, whose source for tough guy combat veterans can be hard to identify aloud. Then there's the guilt of explaining why even the most loving and sensitive partner or spouse cannot fill the role of combat buddies. As an Army lieutenant, Brandon Friedman commanded infantrymen in Afghanistan and Iraq on long combat tours. When he came home, he found it difficult to sleep when he wasn't in a room full of men for company. Try explaining that to a girlfriend, he told me with a sheepish grin. What's up, Tav? What up, blood? Families mirror these experiences. Homecoming is desperately anticipated, but in the days and weeks afterwards, many families struggle to accommodate the new person who's come to live with them, incapable of really understanding what he or she has been through, and unable to describe their less dramatic but still difficult and lonely lives at home. The clash of needs can be emotionally painful, and rebuilding relationships an added challenge. The short distance from dusty battlefield back into the civilian world of clean pavement, unthreatening crowds, green lawns, ATMs, and air conditioning can be disorienting, which the Marines of 1-6 learned quickly as they finished their commitment to the Marine Corps after they returned from Afghanistan in the summer of 2010. You get a sheet of paper and go around and get things checked off. You turn in your weapons and stuff. They print off your DD 214 discharge record. We all know. I came back to the barracks, packed up, and drove home with my sister, Doss told me. 2 weeks before, I'm in Afghanistan. Now I'm at a keg party. Absolutely insane. But the exhilaration wears off. I was so happy to be out, to be alive, and then you start to miss it. Little things. How simple it all was. My friends at home had no idea what I did. Doss paused, and the rest came out in a rush. For me, it was Afghanistan on my mind all the time. And I did want to talk about it, but the few times I tried to tell them stories that happened, it would be really awkward and they wouldn't know what to say. Like my friend getting his legs blown up. What's up, Patton? What do you say to that? It made me not want to talk about it ever. And that sucks. Doss told me that while he was in Afghanistan, all his friends back home in Schenectady got into heroin. And when Doss came home, he got into it too. And did heroin for 3 years before he was able to quit. Thank goodness. I went to rehab twice and to detox 5 times. And every time I relapsed the first day out. He said, finally, the VA put him on a heavy regimen of Suboxone an opioid medication designed to treat addiction. And he's been clean for 3 years, but not out of trouble. In April 2015, almost 5 years after returning from the war, he had hit a bad patch. I was in bed with a girl and I got up to look at my phone, and there on Facebook was a picture of our Afghan interpreter who got shot in the face. That pushed me over the edge. Just real sensitive about death since losing my dad. I know that pain. I know that ache. There was a little entrance hole in his cheek, and I didn't want to see the exit hole. It would be bad. After that, I kind of lost it. Doss ended up in an inpatient VA program for PTSD for several weeks. It was a lockdown, he said. They take away your shoelaces. I had seen it over and over again. People who perform not just well, but extraordinarily well in wartime military service, who got home, got out of the military, and just floundered. Some were able to find their footing in a new life and move on. Others were not. One of those was Rosendo De Leon, a Marine gunnery sergeant from 1-6, who befriended and watched over me in Afghanistan in 2008. De Leon was a big man, his round face almost split into a grin, always ready with a word of encouragement. When I started to droop after hours on the move, at war, he was indefatigable, his good humor and sunny disposition unquenchable. He came back from Afghanistan, got out of the Marines, acquired a Harley Davidson motorcycle, and grew an immense black beard. I didn't know it at the time, but he was carrying a heavy load of guilt and sorrow for Marines killed in action. Young men he thought of as his sons, whom he felt he should somehow have protected. Gunny De Leon, which is how I think of him, grew up in Kingsville in South Texas. His family fondly called him Gordy, short for Gordito or Chubby. But he wasn't fat, just big. He ran cross country and won scholarships to college, but joined the Marines instead, thinking he wasn't college material. He did well in the Marines. He especially loved the training and mentoring of young Marines. But in 2008, he told me he was getting tired. And in 2011, he retired as a master sergeant. Then things slowly fell apart. He got work as a civilian contractor at Camp Lejeune. But for someone who'd reveled in the position of a senior enlisted leader of Marines, it wasn't the same. He felt his experience and talents were being wasted. At one point, he got word back that a Marine buddy had been killed, sending him into a black depression. He felt he was trying to come up for air and kept getting pushed back down. Started running with a motorcycle gang. People close to him noticed the sparkle had gone out of his soul. His eyes looked empty. It looked like he was trying to hide himself behind that big black beard. It's impossible to untangle the emotional strands of a worsening situation like this. But from what I could piece together, it appears that Gunny De Leon gradually grew apart from his wife and 2 teenage children. He had been diagnosed with PTSD and was seeing a counselor once or twice a week, but he hated going and taking the medication they gave him. I don't know if Gunny De Leon had PTSD or not, but the VA's therapy and pills didn't seem to help. With the moral injury that wore him down, his grief and guilt over the death of his buddies, his deep sense of regret and loss for having quit the Corps, and the shame of having to take the medication. Around Christmas of 2014, something set him off into a violent frenzy that brought the MPs to his house in Jacksonville. But then DeLeon seemed to pull himself together. He got into a program for struggling Marine veterans. When he came back, friends showed up to offer help and support. He told a cousin he hadn't realized how many people cared about him and how many people's lives he had touched. He shaved off his beard. One rainy night in May of 2015, he was riding in Jacksonville just outside of Camp Lejeune. According to the Jacksonville police, just after midnight, he drove his motorcycle at 55 miles per hour through a red light and into an intersection where he struck an SUV. He died 5 days later. Whether he crashed on purpose or not can't be known. But one thing is certain, in the end, one family member said, he was so broken that nobody knew how to help him. Over dinner one night, the man who commanded the 1st Battalion of the 110th Infantry Pennsylvania National Guard, Sergeant Major Walker's outfit, tried to explain what it's like to return home. It was 5 years after the battalion flew back from Iraq, and Loris Lepre was able to step back and look at it dispassionately. For outsiders to understand, he said, you have to know what came before, what you're returning home from. Loris Lepre takes his names from his English mother, Anne Loris, and his Italian father, Luciano. When Loris took the battalion to Western Iraq in June 2005 into the bloody heart of the Sunni insurgency, Anne and Luciano, who owned an Italian restaurant near Scranton, were frantic with worry. Luciano's friend and family doctor always inquired whether Loris was okay out there in all the fighting in Iraq. Each time he asked, Luciano would burst into tears. After a while, the doctor learned to stop asking. Luciano Lepre was right to worry. His son's battalion, after a year of combat, would soon be burning their regrets and sorrows. From the outset, the sudden violence of Iraq was nightmarish. Loris Lepre lost his first soldier barely 2 weeks after the battalion commenced combat operations out of Camp Habaniya, just off the main road between the hotly contested cities of Fallujah and Ramadi. Staff Sergeant Ryan Ostrom, a crewman on an M1A1 tank, was shot and killed by a sniper on the main road designated main supply route, Michigan. Ostrom was the son of a highly respected senior Pennsylvania National Guard NCO who had retired a few months earlier. Ryan was 25, a junior in college, a chemistry major, Chaplain Doug Eder held the dying soldier in his arms and administered last rites. The battalion was protected by a Marine bomb disposal team. And in September, an IED blast killed one of them, Marine Sergeant Brian Dunlop. In early November, the popular and charismatic Marine gunnery sergeant, Daryl Boatman, also a bomb disposal tech, died of his injuries sustained in a bomb blast 2 days earlier. We were taking 2 or 3 IEDs a day, Lepre told me. Between small arms fire and IEDs, it was waking up every day thinking, God, please don't let anything happen to any of my guys today. Apart from soldiers killed, the battalion's troop collected more than 60 Purple Hearts for battle wounds. Lepre held ultimate responsibility for his soldiers when he took over from the battalion that Task Force Panther replaced. It was like, wow, this is my responsibility now. Like most combat commanders, he found he was short of manpower to do the job he was assigned. The previous unit was short of troops, and Lepre had even fewer than that. He had 100 square miles to cover, and not enough soldiers to do it. Not enough to protect local civilians. Not enough to keep his own guys safe. As a battalion commander, Lepre didn't draw up the operation plans. His lieutenants and captains did that. But he scrutinized them and approved them. And he knew which areas were the most dangerous and which soldiers were assigned to patrol down those streets and alleys. It was difficult watching them go out the gate. Difficult when the radios would light up in the Tactical Operations Center and the patrols would start calling stuff in. And that was the most hair-raising thing, he said. Casualties were identified by each soldier's identification number, and the numbers would come in over the radios, and Lepre would look up to see who it was, which soldier he sent out who wouldn't be coming back. The battalion's log record recorded the grim details. November 2nd. Specialist Tim Brown was killed when an IED exploded beneath his Humvee in MSR, Michigan. November 10th, Michael C. Parrott was killed by a sniper while riding on a tank. The battalion's Quick Reaction Force, or QRF, responded. The subsequent melee, Sergeant Joshua Tarondo, at 27, was shot in the mouth and killed instantly. Several weeks later, a convoy of 4 Humvees returning to Camp Habanilla, where an argument about the safest route to take, and the lead Humvee mistakenly swung onto a road that hadn't been cleared by bomb disposal guys. An IED and fireball erupted beneath the convoy's last Humvee. The turret gunner, Specialist John During, was killed instantly. 4 others rolled out of the wreckage on fire. Chaplain Eder arrived to administer last rites and comfort the survivors. The 4 badly burned soldiers were medevaced to the burn unit at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, and one by one succumbed to their wounds. Spencer Akers, Joshua Yeomans, Matthew Weber, and finally Dwayne Dresky, who had lived on for 8 months. Sorry about the sun, y'all. As casualties mounted, Loris Lepre said it becomes more difficult because you don't want to be sending missions out where they're likely to have guys killed. So there's this balancing act of what you really need to do and also how to safeguard your people. Sleep, any kind of rest, really came hard for Lepre and other commanders. You had to be constantly on alert. They're always seeding IEDs while you're not watching, he once said of the insurgents. Then suddenly, Lord Slepry was home. The battalion flew back to the United States on Wednesday in June 2006, on a Wednesday. After paperwork, medical exams, and other chores, they were home the following Tuesday. It was like, okay, here are your papers. Grab your stuff and get on the bus and go home. He said, I was sitting there with my duffel bag thinking that yesterday I was a battalion commander. Now I'm just another Joe on the bus. In late 2007, a year after Loris Lepry's battalion came home, Army Colonel David Sutherland was finishing up a 15-month deployment in Iraq as commander of an Army Brigade task force of 12,000 troops. It had been an extremely dangerous and difficult time, and coming home was a gut-wrenching emotional plunge. One day recently, he sat over lunch to explain. What keeps us alive on the battlefield is anger, paranoia, hypervigilance, sleeplessness, he said. And the sleeplessness, paranoia, hypervigilance, being aggressive, doesn't just turn off when you get off a bus and walk across a parade field and link up with your family. It takes time. That peanut sauce there for the that's peanut sauce there for the calamari. Oh, it was over dinner. Hang on a second. Now I'm not blind. Chewing appreciatively, he went on. I know, misty eyed girl, I was thinking the same thing, but I don't eat seafood, so. The bonds that exist on the battlefield are unlike any bonds most people can ever imagine. Bonds of trust, honesty, candor, humor. Then you come home with those who are closest to you from these horrendous and vile experiences, and those meaningful relationships are ripped apart. Ripped apart, and you no longer have that support network, and your family may not relate to what you've been through. Once, after he'd been home for a couple of years, Sutherland and his wife Bonnie went to an event at a place in downtown Washington, D.C. It was small, packed wall to wall with people. You couldn't move, Sutherland said. Afterward, I was so high strung. It's the first fight she and I had in probably 2.5 years. And it was all my fault because I was aggressive. I didn't feel comfortable because the last time I was in a setting like that, a suicide bomber detonated his vest, killing 24 and wounding 36. His reaction to that stress was powerful and real, but it wasn't PTSD and it wasn't mental illness. It was a normal and understandable, if unfortunate, reaction. A strand of moral injury Sutherland brought back from combat. I interrupted. Who wouldn't have felt that way? And Sutherland shot back, fuck yeah. For a few months after he got home to Pennsylvania, Lord Sleppery didn't talk much about the war, the killing and dying, about his inability to protect his own soldiers, let alone the local Iraqi civilians who needed protection, or about his late night nerves as he sat in the tactical operations center and waited for patrols to call in with casualty reports. He was aloof. Finally, his wife got fed up. I think she was afraid to ask me, he said. But she finally kind of tore me a new one, and that made me snap out of it. After that, I started to open up a little. But it wasn't until their son, Loris Lepre II, graduated from West Point, who went on to serve in Afghanistan, that Loris really got it. Understood what wives and families go through and how communicating and sharing really is key to reentry into normal life. Now, it was the former battalion commander who worried constantly about his son in combat. In fact, he was terrified that one day would come the knock on the door, and there would be Chaplain Etter in his Class A's, the Army's jacket and tie uniform, to deliver the news that his son was a battle casualty. The role reversal now, he was the one waiting at home with a loved one at war, made him realize he'd been kind of selfish. I realized I'd been so focused on what I was doing in Iraq that I hadn't given my wife much time. It was stunning realization. Boy, she was really going through a lot. Now I know what it's like. I needed to be a friend and more open. One of Loris Lepre's young captains in Iraq was Brad Ruther, a West Point graduate, class of 1998. He'd become disillusioned with the Army and eventually resigned his commission to work in commercial real estate in Ohio. Ruther was a member of the Individual Ready Reserve, those former soldiers who are unpaid and do not drill or train, and are the last category to be summoned back to active duty. But one day, his father called to say a letter had come from the Army. Oh, Six Oaks. Oh, boy. Read it to me, Brad said. After listening for a few seconds, protested. Don't be funny. It was no joke, and he was soon on his way to Iraq with the 1st Battalion, 110th Infantry, Pennsylvania National Guard, where he commanded the battalion's Quick Reaction Force and the Base Protection Force. Those were jobs that tested him in every way. Camp Havanea was often under attack by small arms or mortars or rockets, and his teams would leap to the defense in case it was a major assault. The QRF routinely went out with the bomb disposal guys to IEDs and also was the emergency rescue force when troops got into trouble. For the soldiers and for Ruther himself, it was constant stress. The death of Sergeant Joshua Tarondo, who served on the QRF, hit him especially hard. Like Ruther, Tarondo was recalled from the IRR and reported for a war tour when his country needed him. When a loader on one of the battalion's tanks was shot in the head and killed instantly, the battalion launched the QRF to find and kill the sniper. Ruther disagreed sharply with this decision, as his previous training as an infantry officer taught him that the proper tactic in reacting to a sniper was never to break contact, especially in cases like this when the location of the sniper was unknown. The soldiers at the scene could handle it, he thought. Ruther immediately called the battalion headquarters protesting the decision to send out the QRF and asking for them to be recalled, arguing that searching for a sniper is an in an unknown location was a bad idea for many reasons. Obviously, too. I mean, but his protest fell on deaf ears. His guys were already on their way, Ferrando among them. Ruther deployed with the 2nd QRF platoon and sped to the area of contact. By the time he got there, Toronto, who had climbed into the building they called the old potato factory to hunt down the sniper, was shot in the mouth. That evening at Camp Habanilla, Ruther sat down and wrote a letter to Toronto's dad. This wasn't something that had been taught at West Point. Ruther did the best he could, praising Toronto as a model soldier and leader. But he included his personal email address, and Toronto's dad, a retired soldier, wrote back to demand details about how his son died. Sent him a lot of stuff that was probably classified, Ruther told me, but I didn't care. The guy lost his son. When the battalion returned from Iraq, Ruther called the Toronto family and even attended a Toronto family wedding in Chicago. A relationship he nurtured as much for the sake of as for theirs, his sake as for theirs. I had a lot of guilt for a long time, he told me. He had argued harder against sending out the QRF, he felt. Toronto might still be alive. He wondered over and over, did I screw up? Ruther had been back from Iraq 2 years or so when he began jerking awake when his watch alarm mysteriously went off every night around the same time. It was the watch he'd used in Iraq, but he hadn't set the alarm. Finally, I was like, when did Josh get killed? And holy shit, even with the time difference, my watch was going off within 15 minutes of when Joshua got killed. When he told his wife, she suggested he call back and check in with Toronto's dad. The next day, Ruther called and they talked, and that the alarm stopped going off. But there are some things that just don't go away, Ruther told me. Guilt and sorrow cut deep. And while we might often tell Brad Ruther that he shouldn't feel guilty, that he did nothing wrong, and that the death in war is inevitable, his sorrow and guilt are a lasting moral injury. My hardest month is November because there are anniversary dates in there. And I tend to be more isolated. I won't really want to work. I tend to drink more. And the demons come back. And I'm always in my dreams fighting. Why the fuck am I dealing with this shit 10 years later? I have dreams now that I haven't had in a long time with all this stuff about ISIS. Sorry. Headspace and timing issues. So I'll start back on this paragraph. Even though he hasn't been diagnosed with PTSD, Ruther has done a 12-week outpatient PTSD program at the VA and found it helped him with think more rationally about the war. I wish I'd gone earlier. I'd encourage anyone to go get counseling for this stuff. He still goes to the VA for therapy. What we did out there was just not normal, he said. I don't think it will ever get better. You've just got to live with it. The good thing is, pretty much everybody I know has issues. The guys that don't have issues are the scary ones. And that'll do it for this chapter, y'all. Chapter 14 will be the last one. I'll try to get it tomorrow. I've got to go to another one of my branches, so it's 3 hours away. So I'll try to get back in time to get it done. I don't think I would either, Patton. Yeah, Woodrow, it was a lot. I didn't know if I could finish it. That Marine Master Sergeant hit me hard. I'll still be on tonight if we're going on. Sorry I ignored the chat. I saw we had a interloper and no, I haven't set it up yet. Mrs. Metcal, this week I have been freaking swamped. So I'll leave it at that unless anybody has any questions, want to talk about anything. I know Tav has been in here talking and Six Oaks. So I hope everything's okay there. Yeah, Pat, truly. Anywho, I will talk to y'all. Are you gonna? No, they're probably gonna have a house party or something, Woodrow. They'll, I put on a 8-hour there's an 8-hour squirrel stream that I saw GS in here, so no feline supervision. They don't do too well in cars. My daughter's cat's awesome in cars. Well, Six Oaks, I just wanted to get word out that most people just won't pick up. And I think it helps military members and civilians alike to understand. So normal-ish time tonight. Okay. You heard it from Jeff himself. Normal-ish time. Hey, Spider Dog. I get it. I was doing that yesterday and the night before. All right, y'all. I'm gonna end it here. Y'all be good.